understanding of it is that based on the market maker's game, we get areas where the dealers are perhaps starting to get exposed, or the market makers are starting to get exposed. And from that exposure comes opportunity to maybe start fading into those narratives. Now, just because an arrow is there doesn't mean that you're starting to sell it. It means that you're aware that the buyers are heavy. It's a very, very heavily bought market, or a very heavily sold market. Now, it can obviously be heavily bought all the way through an uptrend. That's why there's an uptrend. It can be heavily sold all the way through a downtrend. That's why there's perhaps a downtrend. So an arrow doesn't make the market a sell market or a buy market. That's not the point of the whole concept, and it would be wrong for you to think that that was the point of this as a trade narrative. So we've got to try and do better than simply to, we've got to do better than that. We've got to do better than those as stories, haven't we? So one of the things that we've got to try and do is make sense of what's going on. There's got to be a storyline. This is a 30-second S&P chart, and you can see where the deltas seem to be overly exposed. In other words, the market seems to be overly short, or the market seems to be overly long. Now, an overly short market is like gamma, isn't it? What do we mean by that? Well, it's not overly short until the shorts start feeling some pain. Yes? So in other words, there's either got to be, I hate to say it, but there's either got to be a candle reversal. Otherwise, the deltas aren't feeling any pain, are they? Think about it. It doesn't matter how many deltas you've got in the market. If the price keeps going up, none of the deltas are feeling any pain, so they're not in any trouble. Just the same way as if I find a lot of people buying loads and loads and loads of puts. So if I see somebody, the price rallies here, and I see somebody buying a put option here, and it's huge, it doesn't mean the market's going to sell, because obviously this happens here. Well, the dealers don't have to put in a sell below that price, do they? And then another huge put option buyer comes in there. It's still not bearish, so long as the price keeps going higher. Another huge put option comes in here, still not bearish, as so long as the price goes higher. Well, delta's the same. If a delta buyer comes in here and they bid into that level, well, that doesn't mean it's bearish. And if the delta comes in and bids into this level, and there's even more deltas, that doesn't mean it's bearish. And the delta comes into this level and it's bid again, and we're getting more and more deltas, still doesn't mean it's bearish. It just means we're getting to a price that's starting to become perhaps overbought, but it's still not bearish. Never will be bearish. So obviously when that's not bearish, when does it become bearish? Well, it becomes bearish when the delta starts feeling some pain. Because obviously if there are more and more and more deltas at higher prices, all of these guys are starting to recognize that there's still buyers at higher prices, but they're not getting anywhere. So obviously we start seeing things like POCs or Marabuzzo type candles. And obviously the delta starts feeling pain perhaps here, which might start picking up more deltas here, which might then pick up more deltas here, which may well take us all the way down to the bottom edge. You see the story? You see the story evolving? Well, that's what we start thinking, isn't it? That's the concept we start considering. So arrows are not buy and sell signals. They won't ever be buy and sell signals. They're only stories. So we can see into this storyline here, it looks like there's the deltas, the sellers are a little bit exposed here. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, that means if the price starts coming back away from that arrow, because obviously if there's a lot of sellers in here, if there's a lot of sellers in here, which puts this possible delta buyer in place, then of course the break back out of that area could be a buy trade, couldn't it? And that gave you a perfect example of a buy trade. Now look at this area here. You see the difference? So there's a lot of buyers up here. The market is very overbought here, but that doesn't mean anything. It means there's a lot of buyers at higher prices. There's a very good chance it's going to keep going higher, but there is a lot of buyers here. Last trader in is only known after the price starts selling back off. So obviously when we see that, we start thinking to ourselves, right, there's a lot of buyers in here. So if the price can't go back below that kind of level here, those buyers, doesn't make any difference. They're still in profit, right? They're still predominantly in profit, and the price is carried on going. So unless these arrows reverse, unless we get some sort of solid reversal from these phases, when we think about this kind of gives us a couple of ideas, really. You agree with that? So the arrow isn't a buy and a sell, but it's a warning that there might be a buy and a sell. Do you understand the difference? It's a warning. So for example, you see this arrow here. Well, that's not a sell trade, is it? If you just took that as a sell trade, you would have got absolutely annihilated in this big up candle. Well, that's not a sell trade. It's only a sell trade if that buyer gets jammed into that sell. They don't get jammed. This arrow here, this guy here, this buyer, well, they don't get jammed either, do they? So obviously that's only going to be a trade if the price then broke back out of that area. So that's not a sell. It's probably more likely to be a buy. You understand? But take a look at this one. So what about this guy here and this guy here and this guy here? Well, they did reverse. So you can see that whilst the buyers are pouring in here, they end up getting jammed. Now there's a possibility of a market break south. There's where you would be able to place a pop into that sell trade right there, right? So we've got to be able to turn the price around, guys. Here's another example here. We see some sell arrows. Well, unless the price can break back below those sell arrows, which it can't, there's probably not a sell here yet because there's buyers there, right? That's what that tells us. What that tells us is there's still buyers in this market. So unless those buyers get exposed, which will only happen if they start losing money, then it's not really a sell. It's really more likely to be a buy on a pullback, right? So unless because this is a buyer at higher prices. This is a buyer at higher prices. So when I get a pullback, there's always going to be a chance of a possible reversal buy if the value is still bullish. So this is a buyer at higher prices again here. So obviously on a pullback, if the price doubles back against that buyer, you can almost guarantee the price is going to go higher still. So when we see that happening there, you can see that pops that price higher still. And when we see this happening here, you can see that that pops that higher price still. And when we see this happening here, we can see that pops the price higher still. So you've got to be able to interpret this stuff. Unless this arrow reverses the market, the delta buyers that are pouring in here are not trapped. And if they're not trapped, it's not a sell. It's a possible sell for a commercial, but it's never going to be a sell for you guys. Never going to be a sell for you guys. So it's about building a story. So there is one that gets trapped. On this down candle, that reverses. So that is a perfectly valid buy opportunity right there. Perfectly valid. Because that guy got caught. That seller there got caught. And that's when you try and get into that popper right there. Beautiful trade, lovely outcome. And you can see that that trade there actually was probably the big reason why you started to get that very nice developing story at that point, right? Very nice developing story. And obviously that trade is just absolutely fantastic. So when these sellers never manage to, when these delta buyers don't really get trapped on this trade, well, you can almost guarantee that it's going to squeeze higher, right? It's almost guaranteed it's going to squeeze higher, and there's a squeeze higher again. Stories. Stories, 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 right? Stories, stories, stories. Now, this is interesting because we're now getting refreshed sellers coming in at these higher prices. And obviously, if the delta buyers start finding themselves exposed up here, this could be a possible sell price. No surprising where it is, of course. It's the 40-50 level, wholesale price level. And you can see that there is a bit of selling coming in from that print at the present moment. So fantastic work, but as per any indicator, guys, as per any indicator, you've got to make sure you interpret what is actually happening with those. So a delta buyer getting jammed is a sell. A delta buyer not getting jammed is a buy. It's the exact opposite, right? Depending upon what happens to that delta buyer. Just because there's a big delta buyer and just because there's a lot of delta buyers doesn't mean the market's going to sell. It means the market's going to keep going higher still, right? So that's why we've got to always make sure that we don't just copy our indicators onto our charts and think an arrow is a buy or an arrow is a sell, because it's absolutely never going to be the case. It's an indication of something. And that indication is just information that we can start thinking about as far as what is that information telling me about an opportunity here. From that, we can start to work out what we're going to be trying to do. Now I've completely lost the floor trade, by the way, on equities. As you can see, we completely lost the floor, so there's no way I'm going to be doing any business at the moment on this. If anything, I might well be buying down ticks. But ever since I failed on this auction here, it obviously turned into that buy auction. I've been on the sidelines watching, not interested in trying to chase it. I'm just waiting to see if I can build some more value, and then I'll be happy to try and find an execution. Very straightforward. You don't always get every trade, guys. If that's what happens, if that sell, which is a very obvious sell, I mean, everybody's going to be short here. That's why that break is so brutal, because everybody's short. So all the guys that aren't as aggressive as what I am in terms of trading, they're all getting rid of their positions here and perhaps trying to join in on the buy trade during that period. Well, that's not me. That's not my style. So it might be your style, in which case, great, you'd made some money there, but I never made any money on that rally here. And I don't care. I'll trade my style because it's worked for me for the last 1,000 years, and it'll work for me for the next 1,000 years.